What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled, as always, by the good folks at Nerd Tees, and welcome to week 6 of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2018 CFL season, coming off of the heels of our first Do's and Don'ts edition, and based on the results and based on the feedback, it's a do. Straight up against the spread and over-under went 2-1 in the 3 games last week. That has us 12-7, both straight up and over-under, and we're getting closer against the spread. Only 1 game under 500 at 9-10. Though I do have to apologize, I did say that I would come back to the BC game because there was no line. BC and Winnipeg, I believe it was, because there was no line and no total. I did say that I would come back and give a pick for that, and I didn't do that before kickoff. So I had to take that whole game as a loss because I took Winnipeg in that game. BC wound up winning. So we'll talk about that. But I had to take that whole game across the board as a loss. Had I made the picks, I probably would have gotten the over-under, but I would have missed against the spread because I would have taken Winnipeg as well. So I probably would have gotten the over-under, but hey, I didn't make the pick, so I missed out on that one. We have another game this week that has no total and no against the spread, and I promise I'll actually do it this time. Quick refresher on the standings in the CFL right now. Starting in the East Division, we now have a tie atop the standings with Ottawa and Hamilton. They are both 2-2. I personally give the edge to Hamilton because they're actually outscoring opponents 24-21, whereas Ottawa is being outscored 21-22. I personally give the edge to Hamilton. I think according to the tiebreakers, Ottawa still technically leads the division, but they're there at 2-2. Then you've got Toronto and Montreal both at 1-3. Toronto being outscored 25-15. Montreal being outscored 31-15. Going to the West Division, you got Calgary at 4-0, still undefeated, outscoring opponents 30-10. They're just running all over the CFL right now. Edmonton moves into second place in the West at 3-2, outscoring opponents 26-25, so still very close there. Saskatchewan and BC now both 2-2. I give Sasky the edge as they're only being outscored 24-20, whereas BC is being outscored 27-21, so that's a larger gap. And then Winnipeg pulling up the rear now in the West Division at 2-3, outscoring opponents 32-23. So it's very live by the sword, die by the sword for the Blue Bombers. Week 6, we're back to a 4-game schedule in the CFL. We're looking at Saskatchewan traveling to Hamilton to take on the Ti-Cats, the BC Lions in Ottawa to take on the REDBLACKS, Winnipeg traveling to Toronto to take on the Argos, interesting free agent news with the Argos, which we'll talk about, and Montreal traveling to Calgary, and that's the game where we don't have a spread and we don't have a total because it's going to be enormous. Eskimos are off. They have the bye this week, but probably have the most interesting storyline in the CFL right now. They appear to be on the verge of signing Terrell Owens. Wonders never cease in the best pro football league in North America. So let's start in Hamilton with that Saskatchewan and Hamilton game. This is a rematch from week 4. Both of these teams were off last week. That game was an 18-13 win in favor of the Roughriders. We'll start with the Roughriders, who were trailing for much of that game, but a Marcus Thigpen, running back Marcus Thigpen, 34-yard touchdown run with under 2 minutes left. I think, what was it? It was $1.50 left in that game. Stole the win for Saskatchewan. I thought Hamilton really outplayed them, but Saskatchewan walked away with the W. Saskatchewan had 5 different players make rush attempts in that football game. It was both quarterbacks. It was Watford and Brandon Bridge. And then you're looking at Marcus Thigpen, Trey Mason, and Jerome Messam at the running back position. So 5 different ball carriers. Those 5 carriers combined for 23 carries, 150 yards, and of course Marcus Thigpen's touchdown. Only 19 pass attempts for the Roughriders in this game, so it was more rushing than passing. Obviously, Saskatchewan not super confident in their pass game right now. Probably won't be until they get their quarterback situation figured out. Of note, Charleston Hughes. I made a big deal, obviously, about Saskatchewan's pass rush. Charleston Hughes extending his CFL lead with his 5th sack in that game in week 4. And Saskatchewan's defense as a whole, it was a story of bending, but not breaking. They definitely bent. They gave up 429 yards of total offense in that football game, but they didn't break. They did not allow an offensive touchdown. So they gave a lot. It was like the Baltimore Ravens from a few years ago. They gave a lot, but when it really counted, they kept points off the board. On Hamilton's side, obviously coming off of that loss, again, last minute loss. They were leading for most of that game. On offense, they were the dominant team between the two of them. But the running backs on Hamilton's side combining for just 36 yards total on 12 carries. Those are all of their running backs. Then if you look at Jeremiah Masoli, the quarterback, he had 60 yards on 5 carries. Speaking of Masoli, he just keeps on rolling, man. That is his 9th straight 300-yard passing game. That's dating back to October of last season. 9 games in a row going over 300 yards. It's an incredible accomplishment, even in a passer's league. In that game in week 4 against Saskatchewan, Hamilton had 3 turnovers. They took 7 penalties, where they allow 3 quarterback sacks. I looked at that game as not a matter of, oh my God, what do we desperately need to change in order to win that football game? It wasn't a matter of drastic changes. Like, we're not going to see Manziel in this game. It's not a matter of drastic changes. It's just a matter of cleaning stuff up. Take a few fewer penalties. Obviously, protect the football. Protect your quarterback a little bit better. If you just reduce those numbers a little bit, Hamilton wins that football game. So it's just a matter of cleaning stuff up. In general, I do have to question Saskatchewan's ability to move the football. That's just overall. They're the 7th total offense in the CFL, which sounds fine, except for the fact that there's only 9 teams. So they're the number 7 total offense in the CFL. They're going up against Hamilton. Hamilton's the number 2 total defense. So in general, I have to question Saskatchewan's ability to move the ball, but especially against a Hamilton defense that is very, very good. And honestly, I don't see Saskatchewan doing it to them twice in a row. So I'm going to go with Hamilton in this one. I'm going to take the Ti-Cats at home to beat Saskatchewan. Now, on the line, Hamilton is favored by 10.5 points in a game with the total set at 51.5. 10.5 is way too much against a team that just beat you 2 weeks ago. So I get where that number comes from, but I'm sorry. Saskatchewan plus 10.5 here all day long. That number is way too big and will undoubtedly get smaller. And I think the game stays under 51.5 points. Like I said, Hamilton, an incredible total defense and really an incredible scoring defense as well. So I don't expect this game to go crazy where they just put up 31 points 2 weeks ago. So I think that number is way too high. Take the underdog Saskatchewan Roughriders plus 10.5 on the line in a game that stays under 51.5 points. Let's head to the nation's capital now. Lions and Red Blacks in Ottawa. BC coming off of a 20-17 victory last week, the aforementioned game that I forgot to give the picks for. BC won that game 20-17 over Winnipeg, going on a 20-0 run in the second half after trailing this game at halftime 17-0. Why did they do that? The return of the king. What did I mention for BC? One of their dues, they can't be afraid to go back to Travis Lulay. They went back to Travis Lulay, and Travis Lulay won them the football game. Travis Lulay making his first start in the CFL in almost a full calendar year. Hasn't played a game in the CFL since August of 2017. He comes back in, goes 28 of 41. That's 68%, folks. You can't argue with that. 326 yards, threw a touchdown, did throw a pick. He looked rusty early in this game. Obviously, in that first half, they were shut out. So he did look rusty in the first half. But man, in that second half, Lulay was just cruising. Played an excellent second half to that football game. The BC Lions had 4 wide receivers in that game who topped 50 yards on the game. Why is that notable? Because up to this point in the season, they had only had 3 in total that had topped 50 yards receiving. So they more than doubled their total team number of 50-plus yard receiving games. That's the Travis Lulay factor. That's the difference between having a quarterback that can play and, interception machine. Things were looking good for the Lions. And then Solomon Elimimian got hurt. So Elimimian is out for 6 weeks. I believe it was a wrist injury or a hand injury, something like that. Probably going to be gone for 6 weeks. He's the heart and soul of that defense. So just as things were starting to look up, they crash back down to earth. On the Red Blacks side of things, they're coming off of that 27-3 loss last week to Calgary, the probably most one-sided football game of all the 3 games last week. They had no offensive player, did the Red Blacks. This is including their quarterbacks. No offensive player that put up 100 yards. And the story of that game for the Red Blacks was they absolutely left their defense out to dry. The offense only possessed the ball 22 minutes and 30 seconds. I know, time of possession is an overrated stat, but that's crazy. You can't leave your defense out there for almost 38 minutes and expect that the defense is going to continue playing at a high level. Red Blacks only had 44 offensive plays. Calgary had 65. Your defense can't keep up with that. One of the byproducts of that, we had 8 Red Black players on defense who recorded at least 4 tackles in that game, and a special shout out to AC Leonard on the defensive line, 5 tackles plus 1 on special teams, and did have Ottawa's lone sack of the football game. First of all, I don't expect a repeat performance of Ottawa leaving their defense out there for almost 38 minutes, but as a whole, BC and Ottawa is a matchup of fairly comparable offenses. We're talking about number 5 versus number 6 in terms of total offense as well as scoring offense, but it's a matchup of completely incomparable defense. Ottawa is the number 3 total and scoring defense in the CFL. BC is the number 7, I believe, total defense, number 8 scoring defense. So in that kind of a matchup, if the offenses are comparable, side with the defense, and that's what I'm going to do, especially when the defense is at home. I'm going to take the Red Blacks in this one at home to beat the Lions. Ottawa's favored in this game by just under a touchdown, minus 6.5. The total in the game is set at 53.5. You know, Ottawa's a better team top to bottom, and it's less than a touchdown, so I think I'll take that given that it's in their home building. If the game was in BC and Ottawa was favored by 6.5, I might be tempted to take the other side of that line, but where it's in Ottawa, they'll get a little bump from being at home. I'm going to tell you to go Ottawa minus 6.5 in that one. I feel pretty comfortable about their ability to win the game, even with Travis Lulay under center for BC. The total is another total that is way too high, especially when you've got, like, the offenses are kind of middling. They're kind of middle of the road in terms of total as well as scoring. But then one side, you got a defense on one side that's top 3, and the other one, not so much. But I don't expect Ottawa to completely blow them out. Like, I think this will still remain a fairly close game, but that total is just way too big for me. So I'm going to tell you to stay under 53.5 points in Ottawa, BC. And as always, we take a pause to plug our good friends at NerdTees, nerdtees.ca, promo code BWFinest. Today's blend is Strawberry Power Up. It's exactly what you need at 9:40 in the morning to really power you through making a YouTube video, perhaps. So all of my fellow YouTubers and YouTube progs and all that good stuff, get yourself something akin to the Strawberry Power Up. nerdtees.ca, promo code BWFinest. Save yourself 15% at checkout. Get yourself free shipping in Canada. Get yourself a great conversion rate on the US dollar, because all the prices are in Canadian. Make sure you go to nerdtees.ca, check out their selection, find something you're going to love. Let's go to Toronto now. Blue Bombers visiting the Argonauts. We will start with the road Blue Bombers, who are coming off of the aforementioned 17-20 loss against the BC Lions. Winnipeg 100% let that game slip away last week. You're looking at 5 total turnovers, including a critical interception inside the last 2 minutes that led to the game-winning field goal. Winnipeg really let that one slip away. And what did I say when I was talking about that game last week? I think they should take one more week to insulate Matt Nichols and make good use of Chris Streveler, who played very well. Well, they didn't do that. Streveler had his 5 runs, but had absolutely nothing in the passing game. The Lions knew that they could really key in whenever Streveler's in the game, it's going to be a quarterback run. They didn't mix that up. They didn't at least give them something to think about in terms of Chris Streveler in the passing game. And what happened? Matt Nichols, as the only actual passing quarterback in that football game, only threw for 60%, and he threw 3 interceptions. And here's where I want to pause for a second. Because what is the basically specific line that I said in the Week 5 video? In the Week 4 game, Matt Nichols threw up 3 passes that were knocked down. If you're looking ahead and you're overconfident, those 3 knockdowns can become 3 interceptions. What did I do? Quicker than a hiccup, right? What did Matt Nichols do? He threw 3 interceptions. So Nostradamus out here. Look, they were overconfident and it cost them the game. You had greatness last week from Andrew Harris, one of the most dangerous and dynamic players in the CFL. 17 total touches, 178 yards, 2 touchdowns rushing, but one player can't erase 5 turnovers and 9 penalties. You need more than one player to make up for the fact that the rest of your team is playing overconfident, sloppy, and undisciplined. On the flip side, we look at Toronto. These are 2 teams that are both coming into this game coming off of losses. Toronto with a 1-point loss against Edmonton last week, 16-15. It was a very close game. Like, they really hung with Edmonton that whole game. But the run game for Toronto absolutely disappeared. They only combined for 50 yards on 19 carries. That's a little better than 2.5 yards a carry. And they got Mike Riley'd late. There were 3 opportunities, I believe, on Edmonton's last possession where Toronto had them in second down. A second down situation that if they convert, they probably get the ball back. It's only a 1-point game. A field goal wins it. And Mike Riley, either with his feet or with his arm, got it done, kept the drive going, ran out the clock. James Franklin at quarterback, interestingly enough, he used to be Mike Riley's understudy in Edmonton. Well, he played well. He just didn't finish. And that was my issue with him in this game, was he just wasn't able to finish. He went 26 of 36, that's 72%. I'll never complain about 70%. Threw for 296 yards, did not find the end zone. He did, however, find an interception. So, look, you didn't finish. You got to score points to win. But Toronto can definitely take notes here. They had a super active secondary. I believe 6 pass knockdowns in that game, which is going to be important against a quarterback in Matt Nichols that, look, is not playing very well, especially if they don't insulate him like I mentioned before. He's not back up to speed yet. The fact that you had 6 pass knockdowns against Mike Riley probably spells pretty good things against Matt Nichols. And of note, like I mentioned before, the Toronto Argos are actually bringing in former Kansas City Chief running back, kick return, punt return specialist, Dexter McCluster. They've brought him into the fold. He actually just had his first practice with the team, I believe, on Monday. He's only 29 years old. He could really have a dynamic impact in the CFL. The fact that the Argos could add him to their negotiation list and bring him in and finalize a contract looks pretty good for the Argos offense. I would describe the Toronto Argonauts defense as bendable. Probably going to be broken by a pretty good Winnipeg offense, especially if we see a healthy mix of Chris Streveler. I gotta go with my gut here, even though they're on the road. My gut says Winnipeg. That's who I'm going to take. So I'm going to take the Blue Bombers in Toronto to beat the Argos. The Argos come into this game as 1-point dogs at home. The total in the game set at 51 points. Obviously, it's only a single point, so I love Winnipeg -1 in this game. 51 points, again, it seems really low to me. But, I mean, look, it's 2 pretty bad defenses, but you never know what you're going to get out of Toronto's offense. Like, look, I mean, they lost that game to Edmonton by only a single point, but they only scored 15 points, which is what they're averaging on the season on offense. I want to go over, I really do, because Winnipeg's offense is very good. But then if they do what they did last week and don't really integrate Chris Streveler the way that they should, what are we going to get from their offense? So where the number starts with a 5, let's stay under, but I think this number is actually really good, probably the best number of the 3 numbers that we actually have right now. So I think I'm going to stay under on it, but man, it's pretty damn close. And we're going to take one final check here. Still no lines available in Montreal, Calgary, so we're going into this one blind. Alouettes traveling to Calgary to take on the Stampeders. Montreal coming off of a 10-point loss, 28-18 versus Ottawa in week 4. Interestingly enough, both of these teams coming into this game off of games against Ottawa. Stop me if you've heard this one before. The Alouettes have a quarterback injury. Quarterback Jeff Matthews suffering an injury, I believe, outside of game action. He's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks with a foot injury. That means Drew Willie is all but likely going to draw back into this football game. And look, it's important to note the Owls hung around with the best team in the East Division. I mean, a 10-point loss is not crazy. They went on a 10-0 comeback run in the fourth quarter. it just fell a little bit short. But the real story for the Alouettes, the fact that the defense on most nights is just simply not good enough. They're giving up 30-plus points a game, so that's the second worst total defense in the CFL. Most nights, it's just not going to be good enough, and that's going to be the story of this football game, I believe. Stampeders coming in off that 27-3 victory over Ottawa last week. They just absolutely dominated the class of the East Division. So, look, Calgary is not slowing down one little bit here. However, it is worth noting, Bo Levi Mitchell did leave that football game in the second quarter with a lower body injury. He did not return. Now, all the tests since that game have been negative. He's currently listed as questionable for the game. Pretty good chance he probably plays. He did practice with the team on Monday, but in doing our due diligence, if called upon, backup quarterback, Nick Arbuckle. He's a game manager at best. He went 8 of 14. That's only 57%. He did throw for 84 yards. He did throw a touchdown, but really, he is a game manager quarterback, so he'll be out there. If he's called upon, that's Montreal's best chance to win for sure. Another 100-yard game for Don Jackson in the run game for the Stampeders. And on the defensive line, Mika Johnson had himself a football game where he just stuffed his stat sheet. 2 tackles, 3 quarterback sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and that certainly helped the Stampeders to that, as we mentioned, 37 minutes and 30 seconds of offensive time of possession. Come on, seriously? This is the CFL equivalent of Patriots at their best versus Browns at their worst. So, Calgary's going to win this game easily, handily, especially given that they're at home. Again, there's no line and there's no total. I will come back, I promise I'll do it this time, and update the line and the total in the comments section, pin it to the top. So, those are your games in the CFL in Week 6. Let's go over the picks here with you one more time. I've got Hamilton at home beating the Saskatchewan Roughriders, but I will take Saskatchewan plus 10.5 on the line in a game that stays under 51.5 points. Worth noting, about 72 to 73% of games in the CFL so far this season have stayed under the point total, so it's worthwhile to think about it that way. I've got the REDBLACKS at home beating the BC Lions. I got Ottawa covering minus 6.5 in a game that stays under 53.5 points. I've got the Winnipeg Blue Bombers on the road coming into Toronto to beat the Argonauts. We're going to take Winnipeg minus 1 there, obviously, on the line in a game that stays under the 51 points. And we've got Calgary at home beating Montreal. Don't know the line, don't know the total. We'll update in the comments section, I promise. All right, folks, that's going to do it for Week 6, the 2018 CFL regular season. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the good folks at NerdTees, nerdtees.ca, promo code BWFinest, saves you 15% at checkout. Enjoy the games in Week 6. We'll see you again in Week 7, and don't worry, the next time we have a 3-game week, the do's and don'ts will be back. See you next week.